And welcome everybody to our Beyond the Bloodwork Summit. So we're going to go over some great stuff today, tomorrow, Friday as well. It's my hope that everybody's going to be able to take away some inspiration or things that they might be able to apply in their own health journeys for themselves or for their family. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint here so that we can get started. Okay, so first of all, for those of you who don't know us, let's make a formal introduction. We are Root Cause Clinic, who is hosting this Beyond the Bloodwork Summit. You may know us under some of our other subsidiaries, House of Hertz, which provides a neurofeedback service. And of course, we have our newly launched Where Physics Meets Physiology, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. We are a bioenergetic testing lab. And so we'll talk about what that means as well, too. I'm Veronica Panagopoulos. I am one of the founders of Root Cause Clinic. I'll be presenting today. We'll also have our other founder here, Deanna, in the chat moderating as well. We have come together to present officially on behalf of Where Physics Meets Physiology, our new educational series where we take physics and merge it with physiology, the Beyond the Bloodwork Summit. So what does Beyond the Bloodwork actually even mean? Well, it means that we're actually going to take root cause isolation to a whole other level. And that really depends on how far we understand that that level goes. Now, at Root Cause Clinic, we have what we refer to as the trifecta. This includes physics, pharmacology, and physiology. We call it the 3 Ps. What does this mean? Well, physiology, you're probably familiar with, the body, right? Then we have pharmacology, or think of this as your chemistry. And then finally, there's physics. Why is it important to understand that there is a continuum? Because whenever that we have a problem here, generally we've seen it come up here. We've seen it come up in the chemistry first. But what animates chemistry? Chemistry is animated. If you've ever seen the periodic table, you'll know that it's atomic number, which actually organizes it. That's not the only way you can actually organize the periodic table, but it is organized that way according to the standard model. What animates that is physics. Physics tells chemistry how to do chemistry. So it makes sense that we at least should factor that into the equation. And in fact, physics is no stranger to medicine. X-rays, MRIs, nuclear medicine, it's used all the time. It's just unfortunately not used as productively as it could be. Now, if we have a problem that is showing up here, that is showing up in the chemistry, our blood work, then pretty much, you at least get validated and there's some sort of recourse. Whether you get sent on the right track is a whole other thing, but at least there's something to substantiate your symptoms, or at least so you believe. Same thing here. Once we have the disease model actually showing up, there's evidence to present, right? But what about if there are symptoms, but there's nothing to corroborate that? Then what do? That's when we can use physics, because we can look behind the scenes at what we can't see, what we can't measure, in other ways to try to find an answer. The best way I can kind of illustrate what we do here is that we do software engineering of the human design. So take your cell phone, take your electronic device. You have the hardware component, right? And then you have the software that runs it. If you have a hardware problem, a broken screen, you need to fix the broken screen so you can use the phone. But if you have a software problem, fixing that screen isn't going to fix the problem, right? If you're trying to get reception on your cable, changing the TV is not going to fix the problem. It's a software problem. It's a connection problem. It's a physics problem, right? So software is important because software runs hardware. Software makes our hardware relevant. You can take this same type of analogy and apply it to the human body. You got a broken bone, we get it. That's mechanical. We have to fix it. But what about other things that we don't necessarily see? Whenever that we start having kinks in the hardware or our experience in the hardware, but there's not really evidence of that in the hardware because it's not the hardware who is the driver of that problem. It's the one being impacted by the problem. Software isn't something that shows up in the blood work usually, because once it's in the blood work stage, it's already going to be in the hardware stage. That's physical. So what do? How do we actually measure this? That's what we do at Root Cause Clinic. We're using physics to see what man doesn't readily see. And if you've ever seen the electromagnetic spectrum of light, you'll know that only this little sliver is what we are able to see with our senses. So all the rest of that continuum evades us. The truth is that blood work is the documentation of a much deeper dysfunction. By the time it's there, it's already been playing around in the atomic level or the physics level for quite a bit of time. It doesn't mean that blood work is not valuable, but what it does mean is that if it's not supporting your symptoms, then you're not going to find your answer there. Now, I have a little analogy here that kind of helps elucidate just exactly what we do and how we reverse engineer to find these solutions. You'll notice here we have a glacier on the right. On the top of that glacier, you'll see that we have symptom. On the bottom, you see source of that symptom. So that symptom is really just what's poking through the water, if you will. It's breaking through the surface tension. And absolutely, you can have the source of the symptom localized to the tip of that glacier. So you can have the reason why that you have a symptom right there in the same system that you have the symptom. And usually that's whenever that, the standard model or functional models can help you. You have a chronic UTI, maybe you start taking some herbs and maybe it goes away and you don't have a problem anymore. Okay, simple enough. But what happens when you're doing that same protocol that you read about on Instagram that works for all these other people and for you, it didn't do anything, or the next month it's again the same thing? That's when you have to consider that your symptom, while it's breaking through the surface tension and coming to your conscious mind and you're able to see it, it may not actually be stemming from that actual system. Like the tip of the glacier, the tip is not the whole picture. The continuum actually extends well below the surface of the water and down to the bottom of the glacier. How far it goes? Who knows, right? I'd like to give this analogy as well. Even for those of you in the military out there, you'll be familiar with submarines. Submarines are actually using frequency. They're using sonar to be able to detect the icebergs because it is what is below the water, below the surface, right, that stands to be dangerous. We don't rely on our senses to just look and see and avoid the impact. We're using the spectrum of which we cannot sense on our own to be able to sense that for us. Even without being a submarine, let's say that this is a ship. What sinks more ships? Is it what they clearly see, or is it that which they don't? There is no difference here between that and your own journey. You may have a problem in one area of the body, and that's just who is actually giving you the message. What has actually caused that dysfunction can be coming from an entirely different system of the body. And so if you are targeting your approach where the symptom is, and you are not getting any better, then it's probably not coming from there. So to recap, we call this the problem versus provocation conundrum. Off to the right here, you'll see a picture of what looks like a rash. Just seems like some calming erythema, right? Well, this is actually something referred to as a glucagon rash. And this was this particular client's only symptom. In fact, he came to RCC begrudgingly. His daughter actually signed him up. She had had a good experience with us. And he was just there because his daughter made him do it, as he said. So a rash that he had like this pretty much in patches all over the body was the only thing. Otherwise, his blood work was good. He said he felt all right. I mean, the rash was definitely something that wasn't pleasant, but overall, he'd been going through this for about a year. And when he came to test with us, because we are using physics, so we're not just looking at what already is, we're getting to the root cause of being able to see at the atomic level what is coming up, what is actually showing as imbalance. On this man's scan, it showed that he had a lot of pancreatic stress. We saw markers that were denoting that there were abnormal growths. A certain marker for apoptosis, which is what regulates cell division, actually helps us to annihilate cells that really don't deserve to reproduce, kind of like that kamikaze, take one for the team, self-destruct, so we don't have a germline that goes on to produce things like cancer. So we let him know that he might, want to go get that checked out, maybe ask his doctor for some advanced imaging. He was willing to do it, but he didn't really think that that was a problem because, his blood sugar, his A1C, all those labs, everything showed it was fine. So, if he had a problem with the pancreas, he would know, right? So he went in to ask, and he had a very open-minded physician, and that physician said, okay, we'll run it for you. That's fine. Mind you, we had seen things like imbalanced glucagon. So putting all of those things together, understanding that the pancreas creates glucagon to tell the liver to release what's called glycogen, which is your intermediate storage. So we all know about insulin, using that to be able to get sugar in the cells. Whatever we don't use in that moment kind of goes to a intermediate storage. It's called glycogen. It's in your muscles and in your liver where we store it. That is going to be the long-term storage of energy. But in between, we have glycogen. So the pancreas is producing insulin, but also glucagon, and that tells the liver when it needs to kind of come in and swoop in on that intermediate source of fuel. And that came up as very dysregulated. Knowing the connection between glucagon and its ability to create rashes, that's why we advised him to go to his physician and just check it out, right? Well, he did go to check it out, and the advanced imaging revealed that there were some growths. And so, of course, because this is the pancreas and we don't want to mess around with any idea of any growths there, anywhere really, but especially there, he actually went in, had this biopsied, and it was cancer. So this man had went through the mill, had all the blood work done. His pancreas was actually still performing, but he actually had pancreatic cancer. He didn't have pancreatic symptoms. The tip of the iceberg for him was his skin. He has a dermal rash, and he never suspected that this could have such a deeper meaning. Does that mean that anybody with a rash needs to be concerned that they have cancer today? No, that's not the message what we're trying to pass here at all. The message is that if that can happen in a case like that, what does that mean for our less serious symptoms? How are we going to find the root cause? How are we going to get to the bottom of it if we can literally have a rash, and that rash at that surface tension breaking through the water, the tip of the iceberg, is literally coming up only because of what we just talked about? It wasn't the skin at all. That's why steroids didn't work for him. Topical creams didn't work for him. Nothing in the skin or targeting the skin worked because the skin was just the messenger. It was not who created the message. You can actually have stage 4 cancer in perfect routine blood work. Granted, there's some further blood work that can be drawn that might be able to differentiate that, but how are you going to get that blood work if your first routine blood work showed that there was nothing wrong? How many of you have run through the mill already with your physicians just to get them to do a full thyroid panel, for goodness sakes? Good luck. If that comes back normal, you're not going to get anything else after that. So this is a way that we're able to get around that and to look at things that didn't yet come up in the blood work. And let's just say that they have come up in the blood work. Maybe you're still not able to solidify how exactly that marker is relevant to you. Markers that come up on your labs don't just do one thing in the body. No, nature multitask. And so that marker could be doing any number of hundreds of functions. How do you know that it's going wrong for you, and in what area? Where do you begin to guess? That's what our technology will do. It'll bring those markers up. And at least at that point, we can say, what are your symptoms? What's coming up on the test? How do we reverse engineer to make this explain this? It's a lot easier than you think, actually. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So another analogy I can make that I think will come off really great to you moms out there is a mother will stop at nothing. She will sacrifice everything to be able to make sure her child does not go without. Am I right, moms? So the mom is incurring the stress and the deficit for the survival of the child. That is nature, okay? Think of your organ systems that way. We tend to look at our organs that, aren't performing to standard, that are diseased, as saying, you bad little kidney, you're not working. Kidney, you really let me down. Why aren't we looking and saying, why doesn't this kidney get to do its job as it should? Who's making it work so hard? Who is giving the kidney extra work to do? Who is the kidney covering for? Whose slack is the kidney covering for? Because that's not fair. We're blaming the kidney, we're targeting the kidney, and then we're coming back with the same problem over and over. Well, maybe it's not the kidney who's the problem. It's the same thing here. This image here is actually one of the 1,000 slides that we have in the Physics Meets Physiology course, where we show you how to merge physics and physiology, apply reverse engineering, and do all these things that we're talking about today. Now, everything that we show, as much credence as we may have to, Shaman Raman's North Carolina, festival that may help people come away and walk away feeling rejuvenated and really nice and great, and I don't doubt it. We're using the best universities' information and the standard and the language of the academic establishment itself. This is not woo. This is literally the top of the industry science. It's just a matter of if this is going to get the funding to come to you. Sometimes when solutions are a little too good, they don't make it to market. They get bought up, a patent gets put on them, but not so that they can give that to you, so that they can keep that. On the left here is a healthy cell, and on the right is a cancer cell. These images were derived based on using sound. This is not what the human being would normally be able to see. This is actually a sonocytology field that has now been developed. Sono meaning sound, cytology meaning cell. What's very interesting, and this was a chemist, not even a physicist, who's actually kind of pioneered this field. And you can see the beautiful geometrics that we have in a healthy cell, the coherency, the information there is organized, things are flowing. On the right, we don't really see that, do we? But it doesn't have to be cancer, right, to be something like this. Depression looks like that too. And what happens here is the cell actually gets so tense. It gets so tense that it can't actually move around inside. You see all these lines here on the left? That's where we're able to break and make those moves to allow things to go on in the cell. What does that mean for the right side of the cell here? That doesn't look like there's the same kind of options or layout available to that cell, right? Nope. So if the way that this cell is going to move around on this side is representing the way that healthy movements will go, and this is what we're getting, well, no wonder why we're getting a different result. Your blood work is not going to show you that. The cell is going to keep doing what it does until it literally can't. And then when it can't, then what? In the meanwhile, doesn't mean you can't feel symptoms. Now, in the Physics Meets Physiology course, I propose an entirely new way of looking at things. It's literally merging the Newtonian model, the mechanistic model, and the quantum model, and actually going beyond the quantum mechanics model and putting that thread, that theory of everything continuum that connects the two. Because that is the camp that we have today. It's a one or the other. It's like we have to choose. The truth is that nature doesn't have two sets of rules. There's one. We fail to understand that continuum, and so we just make some stuff up in the meanwhile. The truth is that there's a continuum and it's consistent, just as you see from the cosmos, as is above, as is below. This is another breakdown of what the cell looks like. When I talked about how all those movements actually coincide, you can see that here. Tension tells tissues what to do. Tension can come from many different places. How you feel emotionally, things in the environment that aren't even physical, such as all of the electromagnetic radiation and pollutants that we have these days. Tension's very hard to describe, isn't it? Because sometimes it's something we feel. Is your blood work picking up on that? Your tissues do. There's the proof. I think you'll find the next fact extremely interesting, especially for those of you who might be having some depression, anxiety, feelings of isolation, lack of meaning in our life. Solitude is actually, when we measured what created the most amount of tension in a cell, solitude is what created the highest degree of hardening of the cell membrane. The cell membrane being that outer membrane that encases the shell of the actual cell. So the last 3 years, if you really think about all the changes that we've had going on and all of the sickness that we have, mind you, we've had COVID, et cetera, but people being in isolation and people having issues because of that is no coincidence. Why do we create separation as a punishment in jails? Why do we see that that drives people literally insane? And some people actually physically die from that. Because that hardens the cell to such a degree that you actually can't get things in the cell, and for that matter, out of the cell. So again, tension tells your tissues what to do all the way down to the single cellular level. And when we can't open the cell to get what we need in, and we can't open the cell to get what we need out, the blood can go on and it can be just fine for quite a while that you're not, while that your cells are not. Yourself is not okay because your cell is not okay. Those of you who start reacting to your environment, allergies, maybe your cells can't pump out the toxins. Well, if the door's not open for them to do that, that builds up inside the cell. And specifically because it may be building up inside the cell, it won't even get to the blood to be able to be detected if we are even looking for those things. Is blood work looking for that? Well, probably not if your routine blood work came back okay. There'd be no reason to run those other types of blood work, would it? Probably not. Now that brings us, as we've talked about things like mood, into another kind of area, the immune system. Tension, we just talked about tension, right? And how that creates changes in the literal geometrics and workings and movements of the cell and the actions that it chooses to take. That can affect our mood. It can affect our immune system. That's just the beginning. It affects everything, right? So let's actually see in the chat how many of you have actually come today because maybe anxiety and or depression, mood are actually issues that you're interested in learning about. Let's see some of these comments. Proof that we were intelligently designed. Absolutely. Absolutely. The more that you study physics, it's funny because in physics, the whole idea is you're supposed to work with the notion that there is no higher power or creational intelligence or design. But, the more that you actually study physics, the more that you'll have God staring back in the face at you because it's undeniable, at least in my opinion. Okay, let's see. I don't think anybody has said that they have joined for that specific reason, but I do know that that's probably one of the most common things that are actually brought to my attention. Oh, nope. Yes, I caught up in the chat. Yes. Hashimoto's as well, autonomic dysfunction. Yes, all of that. Yes. So yeah, that is one of the number one things that people ask me is that, do you know anything I can do for anxiety or, what kind of things do you recommend for that? It breaks my heart because people are running on an experience that we're not designed to experience. Look at the gazelles out there. I mean, gosh, they're running for their life one minute, going to be literally dinner. And from that, once that threat is gone, it's back to chewing the cud, right? They go back with all the little gazelle friends and life is just peachy keen. And when the threat comes again, it comes, but it's not this carried over state and preoccupation because we're not designed to live in that tension state indefinitely. Tension freezes and it freezes, and that freezing effect literally creates this hardness to the point that it becomes so brittle that we particleize, we break apart. So when we talk about from dust to dust, it's literally true. All right, so what's this complement system stuff that I'm talking about? We had a little introduction to some slides from actually our educational course that you can see. So you can see some of the material that we're presenting there. We talked about the cells and how tension can create issues for us in almost any way possible down to our mood, actually into our immune system, and every other part of the body. So the complement system is something that exists in your liver, right? We have actual networks of cells there that are going to either boost the immune system or let business go on as normal. This is a response that should get triggered whenever we actually do have issues. But what happens if maybe your cells that we showed in that picture in the first one where we had what looked like a cancer cell, heck, it doesn't have to be a cancer cell, but maybe that's kind of looking a little murky. It's not looking like this beautiful one that's organized and coherent over here. So what kind of job is that doing over here? Or furthermore, what if there's tension again, and we're changing the way that those cells operate? Well, then that cell's kind of like the hard of hearing cell that's not going to get that message that says, hey, you were supposed to, come on, you're sleeping on the job. You were supposed to get that message and wake up over here. I need your help. And then the immune system has got to go do this work that's not necessarily the job that it's normally going to do by itself. It's used to having that helping hand to give it a boost. And so what happens is the immune system is like, I'm down a man. I got to pull over here. I know you're not supposed to really do this job for me, but I got to borrow you to help do this because he won't help me. The problem is that the body sometimes, if it's kept in that state, may say, well, this is the new normal. This is what we're doing here. And then we wonder why we have inappropriate inflammatory reactions. Why do I have my body attacking itself? Think about that for a second. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, but it's our misunderstanding, because your body has done that because it is a better than choice or solution than some other alternative. As bad as it may seem, that was a substitute solution to still protect you. In this case with the complement system, it can go either way. If you have an immune system issue and you're still just looking within the immune system, what you can do to stop it, what you can do to support strategic portions of it. If you've heard about the whole Th1, Th2, this portion of the immune system does this portion of the immune system does that. That's all nice and dandy. But what if the reason why that started had nothing to do with the immune system and everything to do with the liver's functionality and role in helping to regulate it? Do you see what I mean now as far as your symptoms and your source of your symptoms potentially being in two different areas? Now, it doesn't mean that supporting your immune system or taking some of these things isn't helpful. You can have hormone problems and you can take things for your hormones. It's just, you're never going to move out of that model. You're only going to be cleaning up the spilled milk, because the software that's coming is going to keep coming and giving that message. That message is going to create the mess that you're in. You can keep cleaning up the mess and supporting it. And in fact, it's not a bad idea, because at least we're kind of mitigating or appeasing that so it doesn't happen as fast, but it's still going to happen. The complement system is just one example of how we need to really look in a different direction for our immune systems as far as why aren't we responding to immune system therapies? And it can be because this might be hyperactive, and or it can be because it might be underactive. You may have never thought that something like sludgy bile could overwhelm the liver, create inflammation, and then maybe upregulate everything coming through the liver. And now inflammation is everywhere and crazy. But you're wondering why you don't respond to the therapies that help people in that situation. Maybe it's not the immune system. Also, for those of you with immune dysregulation, you may have heard about the thymus. It's our little organ right here. And this is actually very active whenever that we're children. It's our training ground for what are called our T cells. So it trains our body who is us and who is the outside environment, or what is a foreign type of invasion. It's actually really cool how this works. They have quantum mechanics that they have applied to this, where that we can actually literally see that the body sends information, almost like this literal teleportation. Doesn't physically transport the cells, but it kind of puts a holographic message to the thymus to say, this is what us liver cells look like. So go ahead and train those boys and show them this is what we look like, so they don't attack us in the future. Hey, this is what a heart cell looks like. Hey, this is what an immune system cell looks like. And as we're developing these T cells in the thymus, they quite literally get this recreated display of what these protein combinations would look like. And they're tested. The thymus will literally test them. If they attack or they create this response, disqualified, you don't pass the cut. You don't attack your own body, boy. Get out. And that's how we make sure that we have cells that are not going to attack us. They recognize us, self versus environment. So if you have an issue going on in the thymus, well, obviously this can create an immune system issue, right? But what about the tissues that report to the thymus to train the immune system? Never thought that that car accident that might have gave you some scar tissue in a certain portion of the body, just as we saw with that matrix of the tissues and the cells and how they have to break around with the tension to create those messages and those signaling systems. What if that does not send the right message? Not only is it a problem in that cell or in that system, but how is it going to tell the thymus what it needs to do as far as training who is us and who is the outside environment? That gets a little tricky, doesn't it? Furthermore, the thymus gland is related to the pineal gland as far as how we integrate our nervous system, our endocrine system, and our immune system. This is another big one. If you have an endocrine issue, you have to consider the immune system and the nervous system at minimum. They're the three musketeers. They are your alert center. Alerts can come through on a neurological level, right? And they can come through on an endocrine level, but that's usually slower. Chemistry is going to work a little slower. Nervous system is the fast detection system. Endocrine system is technically more accurate, takes a little bit longer, more quality work, right? More finite instruction. The nervous system is, hey, I don't got time to think about what's happening. I just need to be able to stop and take action that something is happening. We'll figure it out later. And then, of course, we've got the immune system who plays in between both of those worlds. So if we were to see something like the pineal gland come up, we're not looking at that exclusively to say, oh, the pineal gland has a problem here. We would say, well, this person has immune system problems. We see a pineal gland marker. The pineal gland and immune system, what do they have in common? You could go do a Google search and you probably might think, gosh, well, they don't say that this is related in medicine, so I probably won't find nothing. I don't know why this is coming up. Do I have a pineal gland problem or what? Pull that up. The average Joe can do that. Go find your good 8,000 articles on published peer-reviewed research. Blow your mind and say, oh my gosh, I've got a million places to start that I didn't have before. What we're doing is a system. I am a scientist, but you don't have to be a scientist to do this. You just have to have a desire and the will. We'll get into all of that too later. Case in point being here, those three musketeers, your endocrine system, your nervous system, and your immune system, any type of stimulus in those areas reports to the other. So you might have the tip of the iceberg being the neurological system, but who's actually the one creating the message could be the immune system and vice versa. The endocrine system could be the one that's actually at the root of a neurological issue. All of them detect alerts and all of them have the ability to trigger the domino effect. So if I'm just targeting the tip of the iceberg, all I'm doing is taking the last domino and putting it back up. And I'm never stopping the process of the first domino. Deja vu, Groundhog Day, every day, all day. Who remembers all of the alkaline cleanses in the early 2000s? Where you had your alkaline water, you ate an alkaline diet. You probably were told that this is really great because it helps prevent cancer. Things can't flourish in an alkaline environment that are bad for us. So let's just break that down for a second, right? This is chemistry, right? We're talking about potential of hydrogen. Well, potential of hydrogen has a voltage measurement. The thing with energy is that it's not just separate. It's fluid and it's a continuum. We separate it into different units and quanta of measurement to be able to be useful for the application that we're using it for. But you can convert energy from one form to another. In fact, that's what energy does. Energy never just disappears. It just takes on a different shape or form. As it said, law of thermodynamics, energy is neither created or destroyed. So it will just transfer and transform itself. In this case, we go back to those three Ps, right? We have physics, pharmacology, and physiology. So you can look at it through the chemistry, right? We can look at it through that pH, or we can say, what actually is the precipitory portion of that pH? The voltage, right? That measure, that electric measure. And you have that in your gut. So if you don't have the proper voltage going in your gut, then you don't get the proper pH. And all the microbiota type of discussions that people have saying, you know, you need to have a proper microbiome because it's associated with so much of what can go right or wrong in our health, determining all of the activities within digestion in the gut, even your mood, heck, right? Well, the type of microbiota you get is contingent upon the actual charge of your epithelial, or those smooth, flat type of cells that you have in your gut tissue. They can only exist in a universe where they can actually thrive, right? Can we go live in space? No, not without adjusting ourselves, right? We're not compatible for that environment. Boom, it's just not going to happen. You can look at your microbiome the same way. And absolutely, the microbiome can impact us because they're bringing their own charge, they're bringing their own physics to the table. And their physics are going to be set out with the agenda to behoove them at your cost, at your expense. You can keep trying to kill them with chemistry, and I'm definitely not against antibiotics or any type of herbal medicine. Again, if you have a problem that's straightforward, you have a symptom and a system that are together, then yes, it might work. You went on a cruise, you got neurovirus, it's a one-time deal. Take some stuff to help you get better and move on with your life. But if that didn't happen and you couldn't move on with your life, then there's a deeper problem. There's a reason why that became a problem for you as opposed to other people. And that reason would be the physics. Because if we actually fix that, then we don't have the environment or the terrain, if you will, to allow that type of a colonization. Because what's happening here is you're going to keep throwing in something to kill something and eradicate it from the body, engaging continuously the immune system response. So you're going to have literally your smoke detector in the body going off 24/7. Think of it this way. Think of how this will make your body feel. Would you want to be in your house with your smoke detector on 24/7? Gosh, no. We need the smoke detector to sound whenever that we actually have a fire, okay? Do you want that to happen because you sizzled the eggs a little bit too high? How annoying. We don't want that. That defeats the purpose. Unfortunately, though, when we actually put the body in that kind of a state, whether I have a match or whether I truly have a fire, at that point, it just sounds the alarm just the same. And the thing is that when we take things like steroids, again, time and a place for everything, we're telling that immune system, bad little immune system, you shouldn't be doing that. And then we get something that starts growing over there and over there. And it's like, well, you told me not to do anything, bad little immune system. It's kind of like that dog that you punish because you said it shouldn't be barking. Well, then maybe now finally when he does see something, he remembers that he shouldn't be barking. So he doesn't bark. The immune system in that case is justified in giving you that response. Again, we just don't tie the dots together. So it's not about shutting off the symptom. It's about understanding what's the source of that symptom, what's provoking that symptom. Let's catch up in the chat here and see if we missed anything. All right. Today's explanation of the symptoms, provocation, chronic hives and mast cell. Yes, Yodit. So chronic hives and mast cell, that's a very good example of what we just showed you with the cellular dynamic as far as you're having the issues in the tissues, in the skin, but there's a deeper cause to that because you're probably treating the skin, you're probably treating all of the immune system symptoms there, and you're not pushing the needle, right? Melinda says, no thyroid for 25 years has caused me so many autoimmune issues. I've had to figure it out all on my own. I will say the thyroid is one of my favorite areas to work with because we are so responsive. I know that yours is actually out, and one of the stories I'm going to share today actually does involve solving a case where that it wasn't a thyroid that they came to us for, but it actually was a thyroid that was the problem, and their thyroid labs had been fine. Autonomic nervous system dysfunction, anxiety. Yes. Yeah. So to wrap up this one here, we're looking back at the physics, right, to really get to the end of the problem, because If I'm wondering why somebody now has become so sensitive that they can't tolerate any type of supplements, therapies, treatments, well, geez, the situation that I just explained makes perfect sense. That immune system has had that smoke detector on and on and on and on and on. No wonder why it's berserk at this point. It's like the little grandma who somebody has ding dong ditched all day. At one point, that grandma's going to open that door and she's going to let everybody have it, right? So healing is voltage. Now, our cells are actually designed to work between -20, -25 millivolts. And to repair and to heal, we actually need quite a bit more than that. So that's a whole other conversation, because what you need just for daily processes versus what you need when you're in a deficit to be able to get to therapeutic value and create a more regenerative effect, that's another thing. Microcurrent to the gut can actually be a great solution. And we can even do that via neurofeedback, working with the brain, because the brain and the gut talk to each other as well. So if there are issues that you're having, whether that they be depression, whether they be mood related, whether they be neurological, whether they be even immune system in nature, digestive in nature, microcurrent neurofeedback can be a great way of getting a good start. But of course, it's not the only thing. And of course, how are you affected? What is your symptom? What is the source of your symptom? That is a good area to start, but it doesn't mean that it's for everybody. Here's yet another slide that we have from our presentation with myelination. Myelination, many of you are probably familiar with multiple sclerosis. We have issues where that the myelination, or basically what is on the nerve, the covering, almost resembling what you see with the wire, right? That covering, the protective covering that encases the actual wire. This is a problem where we start to see that this becomes degraded. The body will start actually degrading the oligodendrocytes, which are the cells that encompass the myelin sheath. But myelin sheath is not just a problem for MS. Myelin sheath is one of the most common things I see that comes up for children on the spectrum. Interestingly enough, a lot of things happen or take place in the fetal development stage around the 24th to 26th week, where that we shift out of making all the neurons in fetal development and finally start to lay down the myelination of all of that neurology that we've allowed to come to fruition. A lot of things happen in our care system at that time with mothers that really shifts, and in evidence and in research shows that this suggests it could have an anti-myelinating effect. At the very time, we need myelination to occur. So as opposed to an MS where we're actually seeing that myelination that has formed already is now under attack, imagine if that attack happens before we even get to build the fort. So this is why that at 2 years old or so, when the next stage of myelin development actually happens in the progression of how myelin sheath actually continues to evolve and develop throughout our life, we then notice a big problem. We notice that problem because step 2 comes around, and step 2 goes, I'm here to do the framing, but there's no foundation. Am I in the wrong project here? Like, what's going on? So how do we do step 2 if step 1 didn't get done properly? That's when all the software glitches start happening. And that's when we notice it. And that's when we call it autism or spectrum disorder. And that's why we see problems in the gut, because we see the connection between the gut and the brain. It's about how the messages are getting sent. That's just one area that we see myelin sheath coming up in. It can come up for a lot of other reasons as well. Maybe you have neuroinflammatory issues, and it could also be for, such as Yodi's case, with mast cell. If the messaging, the transcription, if that message is being altered when it's getting to where it needs to go, then the effect and the action's getting altered as well. Something like myelin sheath might be the furthest thing from your mind whenever that you're considering mast cell, but it could come up on a scan. And at that point, we put it on the radar. We're not geniuses over here that are thinking of every single potential combination in the world of what could be wrong. We let the physics do the scan. We look at it and we say, well, this came up. So how does this explain this? Go hit the research and see. Just so happens we've been doing this for some amount of time, thousands and thousands of patients. There's quite a few connections that have been on the radar now that we know that we didn't know before. This is going to be one of them. Bones. Let's say we have something like bones coming up on the scan, and you think, well, I don't have any problems with my bones. I mean, I feel fine there, right? But maybe you can't lose weight. Well, we may put that together and say, okay, well, what does this bone have to do with metabolism? Turns out that bone marrow actually plays a big role in our metabolic health. So you might be still taking all of these things to chase the effect, and we may see that maybe there's some ways that the division process there is a little bit wonky. Perhaps some frequency or some support to that system is really the bottom of the glacier where we need to be looking. Here's another little kind of tangent we can go on as far as showing just how different our assessment and internalization of a symptom can be from where it's actually arising. If you have a child who isn't growing, right? And they tell you maybe it's growth hormone deficiency, or maybe that, this kid's just a picky eater. Oh, don't worry, they'll grow, et cetera. And that mom intuition is going off, and you just know that that's not enough or that's not right. We may see the pancreas again come up on the scan. So what does that have to do with why a teenager isn't growing? They don't have any blood work that shows they have any type of metabolic issues. And even if they were eating Doritos every day, generally, geez, diabetes, okay, you got some time before that's going to come into the picture maybe, right? So that's not on our radar at all. But we see that and we got to force a connection and say, okay, well, it's here. So what? What does this have to do with this? And then you go and you see that the pancreas actually is who controls and opposes growth hormone, because everything in the body is a teeter-totter. We have an action that will do one thing, and we have an action that controls that, right? So if we have inflammation there, and there's a hyperproduction of that which is going to oppose growth hormone, and this is happening before we even have that surge of puberty to be able to allow that growth process to really take off. And here we are, we're looking at the pituitary saying, bad little pituitary, you will not let my son grow. But the pituitary is just the one saying, wow, I'm getting blamed for this, when he's the one that really is setting me up for this kind of a performance. Do you see how being able to shift and to use physics can help really put you down to the bottom of the glacier to be able to see how the tip of your iceberg actually makes sense? At the end of the day, after thousands of different clients and experiences, I have realized that if you have a straightforward case and the system can help you, great. But you usually don't end up being our client at that point. You move on with your life, and that's how it's supposed to be. You get better and you move on with your life. But if that is not something that has been the case for you, to remain a forever patient and hand over that power to somebody hoping that it's a guru or doctor or somebody with the answers who will do the work for you, usually that is very hard to come out on the other end with the result that you want. You have to be a participant in this process, not just a patient, because there may be a piece of information that, even a 1 hour consult, which we do at RCC, 1 hour, not 5-minute consults, we still might not even get to that point of the conversation. Or furthermore, you may not think it's significant, right? But if you learn the system that we use, when you review your own work, nothing's going to be lost on you. Nothing's going to be lost on you with your report, your child's report, because you're going to think back and you're going to remember, oh, that came up. That's weird, because when my kid was 7 years old, he did have a really severe poison ivy. Interesting. You may not think that has anything to do with their autoimmune disease 10 years later. We would never ask you about that. We don't know about your kid having a poison ivy rash from 10 years ago, much less that it would be significant for why they're having chronic anaphylaxis now. But you know that story. You know that that might be important. It doesn't mean you have to know everything, but you can know enough to be the driver in the seat and not the passenger. And that way that you can take a lot more advantage of the help that you are getting or the direction or education. We all need to grow. I learn every day. I don't just know all these things that I know. I've spent the time to learn them because I have the desire to learn them. When I have a meeting with a client, I'm not just reiterating what I know at that time. They have come because they want to know what is happening that they have not already heard the explanation before. So I owe it to them to look and to see what connection I can make that has not been made before, because what has been made before clearly didn't work or it wasn't enough. So you are the last piece of the puzzle that you've been waiting for, if you think of it that way. And if there's one message that I can give you, it's that he who has a why can deal with most any how. A very good book, if you're familiar, It was on my bookshelf growing up. One of my mom's college books was from Viktor Frankl, who was a neurologist and a psychiatrist interned in World War II concentration camps. And he observed from a scientist and a doctor's perspective, obviously as a human being as well, what was the difference between the individuals who survived in the internment camps and those who did not? Because they were all subjected to the very same situation, right? He noted that when there was a meeting, no matter how small, whether it was to wake up and value the conversation with your bunkmate or cellmate, laugh about the ticks and bugs that you were with and who was going to eat them, who you might hope to see after all the calamity of war was done. He who had a why was able to deal with most any how. I have rephrased that today after the experience that I have had to say that he who has a why can find the how. Take what is personal and turn it into a personal point of power. I speak from experience because I didn't even come into doing what I do now because that it was just what I said I'm going to grow up and do. I wasn't 4 years old saying, I want to grow up and do root cause clinic and do reverse engineering and all this kind of cool software stuff and learn about geometry of cells and all the like. I liked light since I was very little, since I was 4 years old in the light bright days. And I knew I wanted to work with it. And my first background was in agriculture, working with laser systems to help control algae overgrowth instead of chemicals. And I would have stayed there if I didn't get sick myself. But I did. And when the establishment didn't have answers for me, it's not that I became bitter or said that there's no good for this system at all. I absolutely think that what I refer to as the Newtonian model is valid. If you need acute care or you have an immediate crisis or you have, type 1 diabetes and you need insulin, the developments of the modern marvel are something we should cherish. And absolutely, if you've ever scrubbed in to see surgery and seen what it's like to have a doctor or surgeon bring and resurrect somebody back from the dead and get a heart beating again, it's a beauty. It's a sight of, I could cry. But the problem is that that's just one point on the spectrum. That is one point of the continuum. It's not the continuum. We are hardware, we are machines, and we are mechanistic, but we are more than that. You are software. There is the material body and there is the ethereal body. Literally. What we do is the software version. There are mechanistic specialists. And even many of the problems in modern medicine today are not the doctors who don't want to help you. Their hands are tied behind their back with the insurance models and everything else that we have that are regulating their actions and what they do. They can't even practice medicine the way they want to practice it. So it's not necessarily all their fault. But at the end of the day, you need a result, don't you? And so if they can't either take the time or if they're not given the training because they're not allowed to be educated on certain things, then that's not going to trickle down to you. And so you are going to have to be the one to solve the issue, just like I was. And so I started approaching my health like a scientist because I was. What is causing what? I took this and this happened. Well, that can't be because this is supposed to be good for hair loss and now my hair is all falling out. So I must be going crazy. And then I got busy and I didn't take this supplement for quite a while. And I realized my hair is growing back. Okay, well, I'm not crazy. So what is the research that ties this together? That was the intro into my first reverse engineering in human health. I suffered with alopecia and had almost 70% of my hair fall out. It's not exactly what it was back then, but I've been able to get it back. If you know the battle with alopecia that most women face, that's not a story that ends the way that it ended for me. I continued to have these exposures throughout life that would bring me to my knees. And finally, when I had Lyme disease, that was the ultimate. Having been a diabetic and reversed that, having had alopecia, acne, and been through all of that, these were things that definitely were not great, but I was able to function and get on with life, right? When I had Lyme disease, that was like, you think you're going to get past this one? Try getting out of bed in the morning. Try sitting up and taking 2 hours with your muscles converging like a bunch of snakes twisting together and thinking, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have set up. Only to go back bed in 2 hours and wait till you could try to sit up again. By the time I'd even be mobile was 7 p.m. and I should have been winding down for the day. So I've been there. I've done that. I've walked through that journey, and I know how that journey is. I know how it is to win it. Great people are not born great. They are just ordinary people with great desire. Don't forget that. The question is, are you ready? Don't be scared of yourself. You can do the same thing that we do. This is literally a pebble in the whole sand of the whole game. This is not something that you have to be a scientist for. Again, you just have to have the desire. This is what the physics meets physiology experience is going to be. What we're going to do is we're going to hand over the system that we have, that whether it's you, whether it's your son, whether it's your mom, it's that cookie cutter that you can put over. It's a formula that doesn't cookie cut the experience, because that's the problem. Till now, no one's been able to say, how do you take a bio-individual approach and make this doable and feasible, that I don't have to know every bit of information and put it all together on my own? That's what we do. The Physics Meets Physiology course is going to have 1,000 slides, just like what you've seen. So if you can imagine in this 1 hour that we've barely touched on the surface to start getting you to think about, if I have this kind of a problem, what system should I be looking in? If I have that kind of a problem, oh my gosh, I didn't realize my pancreas could be involved. That sounds like Joe. That sounds like me. Yeah, that could be. So today, that wraps what we were talking about as far as introducing you into the Beyond the Bloodwork concept. I'm going to look into the chat and answer some questions now. I know some of you may have some time-sensitive commitments. I'm able to stay on here and answer questions, absolutely, for those of you who want to stay on as well. But for those of you who do have to go, I just wanted to make sure I was able to finish in time. So let's check out the chat here. Okay. Someone said, I am a good teacher. Well, thank you. You know, the actual meaning of doctor is teacher. That is actually the philosophy that I still believe is relevant to the field today. Victoria said she read the Bible this morning about Moses. Thank you for sharing and doing the presentation. Amazing. Thank you so much. Let's see, childhood trauma. Oh yeah, so for those of you interested in learning about emotions and their effect on human health, actually, let's go full screen here. Those of you who are interested in learning about emotional health and what that does, remember we talked about tension, you literally got to see the cellular physics and geometry of that today. And so when we become hardened, right, what that does to us, what that does to your tissues, different types of emotional interferences have different effects, and they affect some systems more than others because of the literal way that they cause interference. The types of emotions create different frequencies and vibrations in the body, right? Anger feels different than happiness and joy. There's one that's lighter. It's lighter because it's higher. And there's, you know, depression and things that feel so heavy and deep because they're lower, quite literally. So that can actually create physiological problems. In fact, I have a story on that too. I knew of somebody that they lost their wife. They were a 28-year-old young man, and he lost his wife unexpectedly. To be honest, I don't even know how she died, but she died. And he went into what is called catatonic depression, true catatonic depression. And his body just shut off. He literally was like he was in a coma. He was not cognizant. They put him on a feeding tube because he had stopped eating. And he started to have this odor, and the nurses thought, well, bed sores, or, I mean, you know, changing his diaper, like what's going on? We don't know, right? Long story short, this man, because he had stopped really existing, his body had literally shut off. His feces, the gut shut off, and his feces had actually started piling up through the intestines all the way through the mouth. Depression, sadness, grief did that to him. He was in perfect health. So when they say that, you know, emotions can't do something like that to people, We all register that if you get angry, your blood pressure may go up, right? We agree that that could affect things. But when we get into talking about stuff like this, all of a sudden it's like, oh gosh, no, that's the kind of woo stuff, No, it's not. In fact, in the course, we talk about ancient Chinese medicine and a lot of the things that they associated, looking at the full constitution of the person, not just that they have this kind of an issue, they had this predisposition, period, because that keeps bringing that issue. You can't just treat one half of it. You have the material and you have the ethereal. You have the hardware and the software. They work together. You treat them both. And now here we are 2,000-3,000 years later, and we're proving that Chinese medicine actually has validity that we can measure. And we're still the ones thinking we're just so smart. We are smart, but sometimes we're not humble. And we don't entertain the ability to expand our mind to a new horizon, to a new paradigm, to be able to accept a new concept. What I'm posing to you is that if you don't have a solution, what do you have to lose to have an open mind, right? Let's go back to chat here. Uh-oh, where's my chat? My chat disappeared, everybody. Oh, no, here it is. Delay over here. Let's see what else we have. Some other questions so we could be of use for everybody today. How did everybody enjoy the summit so far? Did you find any piece of information interesting or relevant? Photosensitivity, a case sign allergy that just sent me home with a bunch of steroid creams for. So one thing we do talk about in the course is how we interact with the spectrum of light. And if anybody's familiar with light, you'll know that there is what's called a scattering effect, or we can have just plain reflection, right? So if we're not, again, in our tissues, like I showed you those pictures with those matrices, if we're not reading that signal right, we're sending that signal wrong. And we could be sending the light signal in ways and concentrating in tissues that aren't designed to be the ones to transcribe that message. We could be amplifying that message. And hence, it's not that the sun is bad for us or it's a problem. We're the ones interpreting that message and applying it wrong. And so then we react with the rash. Microcurrent in the gut. That's fascinating. I wonder if fecal transplant is something people will use more in the future to reset the gut microbiome. Interesting you should say that, Catherine, because part of the research that we present in the Physics Meets Physiology course is that the treatment of the future will be frequency, again, if they let it. But the future hormone therapy, for example, is going to be giving you resonance, meaning giving you a frequency that will stimulate your own body to have the hormone production, not have to give you actual hormones synthesized from a horse. That's a whole other conversation. If you're taking hormones, this literally cannot be the real deal because they couldn't patent it if it was the real deal. They have to tweak that at least a little bit to be able to get a patent on it, because you cannot patent a naturally existing compound. So they have to change it just a little bit. So if you take your key and you have to change it just a little bit, that changes a little bit how you have to open that lock, right? And so then your cells, they're not reading things the way that they're designed to read. And guess what? They work just like an iPhone. If you try to log in too many times unsuccessfully, you're locked out. We don't think anything is going on here that is good. We think that something suspicious is going on. So we're going to lock everybody out for right now just to play it safe. Oh, shoot, I was supposed to give that cell some stuff to help with ATP. Oh, hey, I'm here for the garbage pickup. Oh, you're not open? All right, I'll come back next week. And that's how the problems start. Is it similar to prime microglia in the brain? Missy, did you want to elaborate on your question a little bit? Fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. Absolutely. Fibromyalgia, that is an issue in the tissue. That is many times not emotional as in it's all in our head, but quite literally the somatic body has held on to an instruction and it's giving the template to that to the heart, because the tissues report to your heart, because ultimately the heart is the one that's going to give that message, that authority, that stop everything that you're doing now and do as I say. The brain is the filter, and it filters through and kind of helps the heart keep in check a little bit, like, we don't need to react to that. Calm it down. We're okay. All right. That's why the thinking man and the feeling man is really the perfect harmonization of the experience, because to feel is to be human. You absolutely must have this experience, but it's good to kind of put that through the sieve of consciousness as well, right? In consideration. But the thing is that if we think back to how life begins. The heart forms so that the brain may be. The heart is the original brain. So if the tissues are telling the heart that this is the message, that will be the message. The heart is not a beggar to the brain to be heard. It will be heard literally through sound waves through the tissue in the body. And so the flesh can quite literally enact the form. So if you are looking for why we have autonomic nervous system dysfunction, and you're thinking, again, this is an endocrine or a nervous system issue, maybe the tissues come up on your scan and has you thinking. Well, you've seen today the continuum of how that might just be possible. Kara has brought up proper mineral balance. Absolutely. Hydration and minerals, as simple as they are very important. One of the things we talk about in the course as well is, how different minerals have different actions that they create in the cell. So during the day, we're supposed to have more calcium. We're supposed to have more sodium in the cell. And then at the end of the day, we're actually supposed to displace that to have more magnesium and potassium in the cell. That's more of a relaxant type of effect. So as you can see, if the tension on the membrane or these dynamics don't work properly, then we're not letting in the proper gradient to and fro of what needs to happen. And maybe you can't sleep and you have insomnia because quite simply, you are still having too high of a calcium gradient at night, which is stimulatory. Things like that can even be responsible for why people feel paresthesia. Why do you feel tingling? Are you the person that people touch and always shock everybody? Calcium in your cells, literally your voltage potential is higher. Tish has asked, what are some strategies to increase voltage? PEMF. PEMF is great. For those of you who aren't familiar with PEMF, PEMF is pulse electromagnetic field. So the thing that's great about PEMF is that it's not just light therapy, it's actually pulsed. And so it's delivered in a way that nature delivers the message. You see, if we were walking around and every single type of interaction or interference was able to just download and be a software that ran our bodies would just all day long wig out. It wouldn't work. We have that filter, and that filter is coming through the body with a special kind of speakeasy tap. And so it's kind of like Morse code. The way that there is the space between the actual taps or knocks is what gives relevance to the code as a whole. And when that specific type of knocking pattern happens, the body knows, oh, that's my cue. I listen now. Otherwise, it's like, that's noise. We don't need to take that in. But as you saw, as we have distortions in our physics in the cells, they don't regulate what they should and shouldn't be taking in, right, as well. And so we adopt another software that maybe isn't what we're intended for. Pulse electromagnetic field is amazing. In fact, there's a device that I love called the biocharger that we have that delivers these, and it actually speaks the body's delivery language. That alone gets the body cued in to say, I need to listen to this, not just here's some other passing phase, but I need to actually pay attention to this. Let's see. Is this similar to, no, we already read that one. Is MCN a kind of machine? So MCN stands for microcurrent neurofeedback. It is a software. If you've ever seen how that leads are placed when people do, any type of neurofeedback or when people are getting any type of, assessments done medically, this is working different than the typical neurofeedback. What it's doing is it's not trying to, like other neurofeedback, force a new software in the brain. It's not trying to say your alpha and your beta waves don't behave right, so here's the new beta and you better accept it, because the brain's going to kick back and go, who do you think you are? Excuse me, don't come up in my house acting like this. And so there's a lot of sessions you need for typical neurofeedback because the brain's like, I don't know who you think you are, but you're not going to come run the show. Typical neurofeedback is trying to beat a brain into submission. That doesn't go very well in the body. And if you have autoimmune disease, et cetera, you're literally reinforcing a threat response there. And so some people actually have a rebound and an opposite effect with that. Microcurrent neurofeedback rather targets the static in the brain. So if you're familiar with the concept of dirty electricity, how when we have all these wires going through our walls and they all crisscross creating their own electromagnetic fields, this can create like a static, dirty electricity. It can actually be the reason why your electronics in your house may not be performing. If you have one of those houses where you're like, well, when I use this, I can't use this device and turn off the blender, then I can't use my dryer, all that kind of stuff, you probably have some static. Well, again, the constants of nature, the physics of nature, it's not like there's a set for us, a set for hamsters, a set for your wall. It's a set for everybody. We just fail to understand how we fit on that continuum. The very same thing can happen in your brain. And in fact, when we had that conversation about the myelin sheath earlier, the way that that messaging is getting, sent because of the lack of myelin sheath or because of the distorted myelin sheath, That's also one part of the problem that we see with autistic children, which is why this is an amazing therapy for them as well. We're helping to reinforce a positive loop of information by helping to take the static that has built up because of that deficiency or that inability to develop that myelin sheath properly in the first place. And so what this does is it sends a signal to cancel that static out by sending the very same signal that that static occurs at. You have alpha, beta waves. You probably have heard all about that. There's also delta waves that can happen, and not the ones that when you're sleeping. Delta is the very lowest wave, and we do get into that if we're sleeping very deeply. But the wave that we're talking about is not a primary brain wave. It's one that's created as a static when the two brain waves actually are not sequenced properly. And so that static builds up. We target the static. We are actually targeting the root cause there. So we take out the static, and now the brain is like, it's so much nicer this way. How would you feel if you were trying to go to sleep and there was a radio next to you that just played static? I mean, your heart's going to palpitate. You're going to get agitated. You're not going to feel well. Well, that's exactly what anxiety feels like, except you don't audibly hear it. But that's what's going on in the body. It's this scrambling, screaming, screeching type of sound that your cells feel. And the cells, instead of being those nice ones that we saw that look all pretty, they end up looking more like this over here in all the distortions. In fact, that image that we showed you earlier, they will soon have a technology, again, whether they choose to bring it to market or not, where they'll have a wand that will only cauterize unhealthy tissue. So if you have cancer, there's no, I'm going to err on the side of caution, take an extra chunk out. No, this wand will only cauterize or kill or burn off a tissue which resonates or which comes up with the frequency of cancer. And they use that based on the sound and the ability to detect the sound of the cell. So this is a revolutionary new way of being able to look at things. And that's just with sound. There's light. There's so many other things that are available to us whenever we think outside of just the world that we can see. Let's see. Roberta has to go. We'll see you tomorrow, Roberta. Grateful for the information. So powerful, amazing message. We talked about childhood trauma. Yes, we're going to do a lot more of talking about emotions tomorrow and a little bit on the third day. Jacqueline likes my analogies. Yes, I find the analogies to be the way to make them applicable. People have to be able to understand. You know, in writing the physics course, the physics meets physiology course, it really dawned on me how we so overcomplicate a lot of things. You know, people tend to think things like physics and all that are very hard. And I mean, they can be made to be hard, but the idea is made so much more complicated, I think, than it really needs to be. It's almost like that's the way we keep a circle exclusive is let's make this all hard and, you know, talk really fancy schmancy. And only us smart elite people can do it. That's not true. Tesla did not go and get his PhD. Tesla dropped out because he said, I don't know what these guys are doing over here, but, you know, hey, I discovered this. Those who can do, right? Okay, feel the same way. You just described a struggle to get up every single day. It was so comforting to know that you got better. Have been so discouraged. You can get better. And in fact, that's the only thing that you can commit to as a narrative is you have to think that that is what will happen. You know, we are not God and we don't know what the end story is. We don't come into the world with an expiration date, right? But if that's going to be, that's going to be. But if you accept that that's what that's going to be, then that's it. The story is done. Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right, right? Melissa was on a PICC line for the last 2 years, keeping you alive 24 hours. TPN came off 7 months ago, still struggling. CRPS, ANS, malnutrition, absorption, gastroparesis are your major issues. You think you need the clinic. We can definitely help you to, again, see what comes up on the scan, see what you're dealing with. What are the areas that come up that are not suspected? Meaning if you're coming to us for endocrine problems, if you're coming to us for digestion problems, and those come up on the scan, which especially if you've been in a pathological state for a while, they're going to come up. But the way we calibrate the data, it will show us coming up with those items in a lower degree of hierarchy potentially, and something else coming up at the top. Let's say it might be the bladder. Let's say it might be the thyroid, et cetera. That's going to point us in the direction to say, okay, of course, the endocrine system, the digestive system are stressed, duh, right? But how are they stressed in a way that we're helping them and they're not getting better in and of their own right? Well, here's this outlier. What does that have to do with driving that, right? Same thing with the complement system that we talked about. Activation. How many women have thyroid problems because they have bad fatty acid metabolism? So the liver gets backed up. You need your liver to activate over 65% of your thyroid hormone. So if you're taking a prescription and you're not getting better, well, then it's not a lack of thyroid hormone, it's a lack of being able to activate it. The same thing. What about your tissues? At the end of the day, the thyroid hormone goes in the cells to be able to help give what you need in the way of managing metabolism at the cellular level. So there's not having thyroid hormone and there's not being able to use thyroid hormone, right? It's a whole different thing. All right, I will answer a couple more questions and then I will probably let everybody get on with their day. Let's see. Thank you so much for opening this up and sharing your knowledge. Hoping you can participate in the program. And my best friend has Prions disease, and you just don't believe that it's fatal. So Prions disease is where we have a degradation of the folding of proteins. The way that proteins are folded actually predates their form. How they're folded determines their function in the body. And so certain types of illnesses are associated with the premature unfolding of these proteins. Alzheimer's works similarly in this capacity. We actually see this marker come up for individuals who have a lot of neurological issues, and they don't have, again, a prions disease that is, diagnosed by the medical establishment in the form that we're familiar with seeing it, such as somebody that might have mad cow disease. But there can still be premature folding of proteins for other reasons. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's that disease. So you don't have that textbook medical case, but if you have a symptom that's acting like that, then you still need to understand that so that you can do something about it. Not just if it comes under the official medical diagnosis, right? Carly has talked about German new medicine. Yes, I have a lot to say on that. I like many points of German new medicine. I feel it is an area that still has many questions that come into the picture, just because I don't necessarily think that emotional conflict is 100% the reason why that we may have a physiological issue. That's one contributor, right? But we control action, but do we control the reaction of everything? We don't. You don't control other people. You don't control the environment 100%. Actual physics, the action portion of the wave, and then that creates the magnetic field, the actual reaction portion. So I can't look a mom in the face and say your child and your toddler has leukemia because you have an unresolved emotional conflict. It's the last thing that mom needs to feel at that point is, great, now I gave my kid cancer. Are emotions a part of things that develop and fester? Absolutely. But also too much of that emotional movement, I think, has the opposite effect on people by paralyzing them with being responsible for things that have happened to them and their family 100%. And I just don't believe that. The picture of the cell was amazing, wasn't it? Andrea said that this has been a wealth of knowledge, one of your favorite videos yet. Angela, my Alabama angel. What if there's an open mind, willingness, desire to change, even to testing twice, but unable to complete protocol follow-up, unable to mentally, emotionally complete? I do have a new approach coming out. We'll actually be teaching it at the retreat. For those of you who have what I refer to as polarization issues, meaning your compass, your literal gyroscope, the way that the cell is working is off, then yes, nothing is going to work for you, because it's literally, if we're trying to take you from LAX to JFK, if your gyroscope is off, you're going to end up in Nova Scotia. And that's a problem. So your results are going to be different. But I do have a therapy coming out where it involves magnets, it involves the elements of the Chinese medicine, it involves tapping and various other things that can help with resetting that, which we'll be having come out in May. Victoria had a stroke a few months ago, was under an amazing amount of stress. Your body shut down. Mariana said, when you touched on solitude and isolation, it brought me back to the idea that a lot of emotional disease has been said to be attributed to unwitnessed emotions, having people the need to be seen and heard to process. If you really think about it, I mean, even in physics, we have, the double slit experiment, which shows that things don't really exist unless we watch them or observe them. The observer affects the outcome, right? So what makes something real is a testimony, is a witness, right? Even you can take that down to the layers of the Bible itself, where 3 or more are gathered. Why does that have power? It has power because we witness. We're not creating the work, we're witnessing the work that's being done, right? It's a different perspective. All things matter, emotions have energy. Absolutely. Jean Marie is weighing in here. Hardware and software analogies. Referring to myelination. Does myelination have anything to do with inflammation? Oh my gosh, does myelination have anything to do with inflammation? It is the ultimate. Myelination and what those cells are made from, the oligodendrocytes, these are the in-between telephone line, if you will, between your microglia and your astrocytes, okay? Microglia are the ones that go in there and they secure the fort. They go in there and they make sure the medics can come in. Medics aren't going to go in if it's not secured. So you have the front line go in and they secure things, right? Now, if we have a problem with that communication, then we've got medics coming into an active war zone. Not a good thing. You don't want your doctors and your nurses and the help on the way to be maimed. When we don't have the oligodendrocytes working properly with the myelin sheath, which those cells derive from, are not working properly or enacted properly, that's why we get that misguided inflammatory response, because we don't know when we're supposed to come in from either of those sides. We don't know when we're going to deliver nutrients and repair and help, and we don't know when we're going to be fighting. So you can imagine all of that mayhem and what that produces. And this comes up a lot in the scans for many conditions. Regarding hydration, if you lose electrolytes and hydrate often, but your skin continues to look dry. I do like hyaluronic acid. However, if you do have what I call issues in the tissues, particularly with the fluids, then that will actually drain you more, because you need water and hydration to have hyaluronic acid work. So in your case, we would probably have to work more with the constitution of the tissues to be able to help that problem. Elizabeth, thank you, Veronica. I've been learning so much from you for 2 years now. Fabulous info as usual. You can't wait to take the course. I can't wait to have you. We're going to talk a lot more about the course throughout the 3 days, but just to wrap that up, in this course, we are going to have a lecture portion. Some of the lectures require reading before coming to the lecture. There's an activities and lab segment where then you go in and you actually apply all the scans that you're going to get. And in this case, you're getting the regular root cause experience, which is a $400 value, and 50 extra additional scans. A scan for your thymus, a scan for your cells, a scan for your tissues, a scan for your dermatological system, 7 different scans for the immune system. We have scans for inoculation injury, scans for the Chinese medicine, every single thing, right? You're going to get hundreds of pages of data. It may seem overwhelming, but literally your homework is to come in and learn about all these systems of the body, about the physics and how light interacts with the human body, sound interacts with the human body, what we call subtle energy. What's the true science of the Chinese medicine and the chakra system? Those of you who might be people of faith who have concerns about working with that, what is the right answer there? The right answer is that chakras actually have been proven, so have meridians, but it's not a matter of working with them, it's how you work with them. That's the discernment that you have to be made aware of. Those are the kind of things that we go through. And then after we actually go through the lab portion where you learn how to do all these things and use the system we're talking about, then we have the discussion forums. So we actually will have on Facebook, for those of you who are there in our group, different modules where that we come in. And if you have a question, you watch the lecture and you're like, well, does this apply, or would I do this here? Would I do that there? That's a support mechanism for that, because again, you're the driver and we're here to assist with that. There's no substitute to helping you to develop to see that form of sight for yourself. Let's see, name of the one for cancer surgery. This is out of UCLA. I'll put that on my stories today. I forget his name exactly, but he's a chemist out of UCLA who has actually pioneered the sonocytology, which is basically the sound, the sound cell field now. We do have Nurse Nicolasa here. If you've actually seen her in the chat, she is our registered nurse who administers our microcurrent neurofeedback therapy. We have that in Solana Beach, San Diego, California, as well as St. George, Utah. And Robin says she needs to stop ending up in Nova Scotia. You know, as if it's not bad enough to have your message lost in translation and never get, you know, that information. Those who've ever worked in secret ops will know, like, what's the worst alternative is that information went to somebody that didn't need to have that information. That's worse than you not getting your information transcribed to begin with. Signaling is everything. You appreciate the summit so much. We're going to go into more conditions and more things tomorrow. I'll give you some more examples of what some of the slides look like. Again, you know, this is literally 1,000 slides of content. You know, we have over 50 hours of material that you're going to have, not to mention the outside material that you're going to have from that. So we're trying to give you a little peek into what that looks like. It's amazing we made a connection between weight gain in bones and bone marrows. Doctors say anemia causes weight gain. Yes, absolutely. Cannot wait to get through all the scans. I cannot wait to go through all the scans with all of you. Yes, Nicolasa is amazing, Cara. Josie's in San Diego. Well, you can connect with Nicolasa. Tish says that she just mailed in her test kit last week. I wonder if we can see the results while going through the classes. Actually, you're going to get a whole free test kit alongside the actual course. So again, if you just add up the value of the scan experience, which is $400, right? And then we're throwing in $2,500 worth of these additional scans. Normally, you do not have the copies of these scans. You can request them. They are $50 each when we transcribe them. But typically, this is just something the provider will run for you as they see fit. Meaning, if we saw some things come up, like the pancreas, for example, and you said, oh, I don't have no blood sugar problems, why would this come up? We're definitely going to look at that at a deeper level. We want to see what's going on. But we don't typically put that into a format where we upload all those results. Just the root cause results are uploaded because it's a bit overwhelming for people to have hundreds of pages of information. The idea is that information is great, but what do you do about it? What do you do and what do you act on about? And it's very confusing if you have all these choices and don't know where to start. Because we're going to give you the system of how to go about doing that, you not only need this information to be able to do so and to decipher and to do the work firsthand, but we're actually going to give that to you with your own data. So it will be productive. You can apply this in the case of your own life or your child's or whoever you want to use that experience for. Currently pregnant, you can still do work while you're pregnant. Obviously, there's some stuff that we don't do in the protocol. We're not going to be detoxing you of heavy metals, for example, during that time when the myelin sheath is developing, not a good thing. But there is a lot of work that you can do, especially for you immune system challenge women. You definitely want to do work while you're pregnant and before you're pregnant, because what happens is your immune system actually starts to dampen so that it does not generate a response against the fetus. But it doesn't mean that there's not stuff going on behind the scenes. It just means that that bill never came for 7, 8, 9 months. And then finally you get it a year later and the body's shocked. It's like, oh my gosh, like I owe this much money. And that's when we feel postpartum or we feel the hormone crash postpartum, when really it's actually the immune system finally coming back and saying, I'm back. But if you do the work before then, you don't necessarily have that crash. I can't tell you that how many women think that that's just a write-off. They cannot do anything during that time. You absolutely can. So that when you do actually deliver postpartum, you not only feel better and you're more present for your baby, but you're able to bounce back and then get into the work that is the more fine-tuning work that you wanted to do that you couldn't do when you're pregnant, as opposed to having to make up for all of what happened during the pregnancy. All right, everyone. Well, it has been my privilege to host day 1 of the Beyond the Bloodwork Summit. Again, hopefully you found some good takeaways and some, most of all, motivation to set you forth in the right direction, whether you choose to take our course or whether you choose to work with Work Cause Clinic or not. This hopefully has been able to be productive for you, a new point of view, a new paradigm from which you're going to expand and never again return. Tomorrow we'll be back at 9 a.m. going into some more topics. We'll get into emotions as well. And then we'll be joining again on Friday at 9 o'clock as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed everything and take care. I'll see you tomorrow.